Good evening and welcome to Metro Focus. I'm Jack Ford. Tonight, your safety and your tax dollars. As we continue our Justice Week initiative in partnership with Public Square Media, our focus turns to a question of size, dollars, and common sense. How can we shrink the criminal justice system without also impacting public safety? Mayor de Blasio has a 10-year plan to close Rikers Island and build 4 smaller facilities around the city. Question is that plan even feasible? And what's more, what might closing Rikers mean for you, your family, your community, and even your property value if this plan prevails? And in a much broader context, policing, prosecution, and bail reform statewide. There are currently some 46,000 people serving time in prison across New York State, so what are the next steps for them? Here with some insight, Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez, New York State Senator and Deputy Senate Majority Leader Michael Gianaris, and Tyler Nims, the Executive Director of the Lippman Commission, an independent group formed to research possible reform at Rikers and the effects it may have on our city. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have a lot for us to talk about. Let's start with setting the stage for all this. And for that, Tyler, I'm going to come to you, given your involvement here in the Lippman Commission. There may well be a lot of people watching this saying, what's wrong with Rikers Island? It's a place where we send people who we needed to take off the streets to protect society from them. So what is the problem here? Why does it, what's this proposal to close it and what will it be its replacement? What's the answer to those?
The first thing you've got to understand is that Rikers Island is a complex of 8 jails. It's jails, which mean that most of the people who are there on Rikers Island are people who haven't been convicted of a crime. They're mostly pre-trial.
And that's an interesting factor that I don't people are aware of. Significant percentage haven't even gotten to their trial stage yet.
That's right. Most haven't gotten to trial. Those who have, who've been sentenced, are only the people who are there for less than 1 year. If you're sentenced to more than 1 year, you go up to a state prison. And then there's another chunk of people who are there not for anything criminal, but for technical, non-criminal violations of their parole. So our commission looked at these jails on Rikers, which have been around for about 80 years, from the very outset, known for inhumane conditions, known for violence. Most recently, the federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York brought suit against the city of New York, calling them conditions there unconstitutional. Most of the people there, many of the people there suffer from mental illnesses. We looked at the jails on Rikers Island. We looked at the physical conditions, and in many cases, the physical conditions are falling apart, the sight lines are long, the conditions are unsafe. Those are things that theoretically you could fix on Rikers Island. But what you can't fix is the isolation. Rikers Island is an island, it's in the East River. Most of the people who are there have to be taken to court frequently. So every day in New York City, you have 700 people who are being transported to courts in each of the 5 boroughs. You cut people off from their families, from their lawyers, from service providers. Most people who go into our justice system or into our jails on Rikers are coming right back to New York City. We've got to take better care of them, and it's almost impossible to do that on an island like Rikers. So what our commission came to the conclusion was there are too many people in jail. We can cut the number of people in jail by half, and that we should move to a smaller system of jails located in the boroughs, close to the courthouses, more accessible to families, lawyers, service providers, and get rid of a jail complex, Rikers, that has embodied many of the problems in our criminal justice system.
Michael, let me ask you to follow up on that last observation, which is Rikers Island as a symbol. How significant is that in terms of the decision making? I mean, we've talked about all the problems. You know, maybe 80 years ago it made sense to be on an island. It doesn't anymore. And the numbers far exceeded what anybody anticipated. But how about what it's become, the notion of what it symbolizes?
Well, I have a unique perspective on Rikers Island because I happen to live about a half mile away from the bridge. And I've spent time on there, not as an inmate, but as a public official, and also working with the Fortune Society. I participate in a mentoring program for inmates who are about to come back out so we can help them integrate into society better. It is a horrible symbol. It evokes for me, as someone in my generation, memories of Escape from New York, which was the movie where they penned off and walled off Manhattan and dumped all the prisoners in there. But more important than the symbol is the practical consequences that Tyler just mentioned. we have a structure where it's difficult for anyone who doesn't live in my neighborhood in Astoria to get to visit family members, for lawyers to visit their clients, and it becomes very impractical and costly for transportation of these inmates to and from courthouses throughout the city. It would work much better in a dispersed system where the jails are throughout the city. The other thing I would mention is jail populations are falling in general due to the historic reduction in crime over the last couple of decades. But we just did something at the state level I know you want to talk about later, which is eliminate cash bail for nonviolent charges. And that's going to end up having a massive reduction on that jail population, because it is, in fact, about 80% or so are people who are just awaiting trial sitting at Rikers Island. So that population will be decreased naturally because of the change in the law that we just enacted.
Let's talk about the various impacts that this notion of closing down Rikers could have. And Eric, I'm going to ask from your perspective as the district attorney. And some people might think, well, if you're the district attorney, you're just saying put everybody in jail. And we're fine where they are, don't worry about it. That's not the case. Why do you feel that this idea of closing down Rikers and opening up 4 other facilities that are going to focus more on not just warehousing people, but first of all trying to dramatically reduce the number, and then with those that are there, let's provide some services, some social services for them. Why would that be significant to you as a prosecutor?
For us in Brooklyn, we have a jail pre-existing the Brooklyn House of Detention. That place is a functioning, operating jail currently. So I think, while there's some concerns from the neighborhood about how we would build a new jail in that existing footprint, it makes a lot of sense for us to have borough-based detention. We have our courthouse right across the street from the jail. There's a tunnel from the jail right into the courthouse. So in terms of public safety, there's not a lot of concerns. But for the sense of being able to have an efficient court system, we spend hours each morning waiting for the bus to come from Rikers Island, often delaying cases.
Nothing is worse, we've all been in the courtroom, nothing is worse than jurors sitting in a room waiting for a trial to get started.
And then we end early so that people can get back on the bus. There's often non-delivery of people who have to come to court. It prevents, I think, the administration of justice. But on a more important basis than that is the human dignity of our criminal justice system. We have to have a justice system that is meant to accomplish public safety, but also promote public trust. And to just gloss over the fact of the tortured history of Rikers Island and what symbolically it means to people to be placed on the island, and the harm that being placed on Rikers Island has done over years and generations, and particularly in low-income and communities of color, just to say that it could be spruced up really underestimates how damaging that institution has been. We can have a new jail that's created with the goal of restoring human dignity to people who have not been convicted, but even to those who are convicted of crime, house them in ways that are meant to rehabilitate them and not simply punish them in our jail system.
Let's come back to this idea of the various initiatives that have been taking place here that are designed to improve our justice system, designed to reduce the number of people who are incarcerated. And let's start with the notion of bail. Michael, let me come to you because you were instrumental in the changes that are being made to bail. Why, if I'm a constituent of yours and I come up and I say, why are you doing this? Why isn't bail a good thing for us? Isn't bail, and we all know this is not true, but a lot of people think it is. A lot of people think bail is a head start on a punishment. All right, get people in jail now to start their punishment, regardless of the fact that they are still presumed to be innocent until they're proven guilty. But a lot of people think bail it puts a hook in them and gets them off the street to protect us. We know that's not the case legally, but what would you say to one of your constituents when they're saying, why are you sort of leading this charge here to change the whole bail structure?
Well, because the justice system needs to be just. And we have forward-thinking district attorneys like Mr. Gonzalez here who knows that. But for a lot of people who are entering into the system, as you pointed out, they're being treated like criminals before they're convicted of crimes. And particularly so, bail is unfair because it does so for the poor, especially. So you have 2 people who are accused of the same exact crime. One of them has means and one does not. the wealthy person will be at home waiting for trial, and the person who doesn't have $500, $1,000, $2,000, whatever the bail is set
And this
at,
comes back, I want you to
is
finish in a
sitting at
second, but
Rikers.
this comes back to what you said, Tyler, before about the percentage of people who are being warehoused who haven't even been tried yet, just haven't been able to make the bail.
That's
Well,
right.
and that's the problem with bail. None of these people have been convicted of the crime for which they were charged, and yet if they don't have the money to be out, they're sitting and effectively serving a punishment. So why is that wrong? We talked about the disparity between rich and poor in the system, but you're also dealing with the fact where some unscrupulous prosecutors, again, not our good friend here, who's one of the great progressive DAs in the city, will use that leverage because, as you point out, it's something where they're already serving time as a head start on their punishment if they're convicted. So someone will come to you and say, well, you've been charged with a relatively low-level crime. If you're convicted, maybe you'll get a year in jail. You've already been in Rikers for a year. Why don't you just plead guilty? You'll be home tomorrow.
And I can tell you,
And
when
that's
I
what
was a young
happens.
prosecutor, this is like 4 decades ago now, and going to prosecutor school, we were taught that.
Yeah.
Use it as leverage. Got a guy in there because he hasn't been able to make bail. Dangle a plea in front of him and say, you know, I know you're saying you didn't do it, but you already got a year on your belt here. Why don't you take the plea
And
and get out?
and that's obviously wrong, right? We're taught that you're
And
innocent.
yet hard for some people to say no to
Well,
if they've been in there for a year.
You know, it's interesting. It takes a tremendous amount of courage and bravery for someone who didn't do a crime to say, I'm going to spend more time on Rikers than I need to in order to try and prove my innocence. But we're taught throughout law school, we're all lawyers in one form or another, that you're innocent until proven guilty in our system. But the reality is you're guilty unless proven wealthy, because if you don't have the money, you're spending time at Rikers even if you're not convicted.
So what are we seeing now as bail options?
But right now, for the nonviolent charges, for the most part, misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies, there is no bail. There's no cash bail in the system as of January 2020 when this goes into effect. Judges will be able to impose conditions on the release of some of these defendants, where they could be required to check in with the kind of the equivalent of a parole officer.
And not just letting them, not just necessarily saying, go.
In some cases,
Some
yes.
places it's that, but others, if the
there will
judge
be-
feels there's a need,
There will be some discretion. What they can't do is detain them in jail prior to a conviction. Now, the violent crimes are treated the same way they are today. We're not changing the system for violent crimes.
it's important that people recognize that. This is not across the board.
That's right. But people are surprised how many of the people in our criminal justice system are there for nonviolent crimes. We think about 80% of the jail population will be affected by this change. So
The overwhelming majority of people.
And are you okay with that as a prosecutor? Are you okay with the notion of sort of relaxing what were the traditional approaches to bail?
Absolutely. I called to end cash bail because the issue with cash bail, as the senator said, was an issue that it was a poverty tax. If you could not afford $200 or $500, you were kept in. If you could afford that small amount of bail, you were let out. And as cases became more serious, more and more people got kept in if they were poor. There's a number of people who $1,000 is basically a remand status. But not only was it unfair, it didn't provide for public safety, because the concept that if you could afford to be out really speaks to that the system wasn't designed for public safety. What it was meant to do was entrap people who could not afford it, people who could afford to make bail regardless of how serious the charge was, regardless of what their criminal backgrounds had, they got out. So we needed a system that actually made sense in terms of public safety.
Tyler, from your perspective and the commission's, when you're seeing these proposals, how do they fit into the overview that you had of the justice system of what needs to be done to help in terms of the population that we have in prisons?
And we had about 45 different recommendations for how the justice system could be improved so there are fewer people in jail. We don't have a monopoly on all the good ideas that are out there, but one of the centerpieces is getting rid of cash bail. So very important what has been done in the legislature. Discovery reform, speedy trial reform, also things that have happened a few weeks ago. But I want to make a bigger point, which is that when we talk about the justice system, we're often talking about the risk of letting somebody out. But what we rarely talk about is the risk of putting somebody in jail who doesn't need to be there. And the consequences of spending even a few days in jail are really serious. We can imagine it in our own lives. How would we explain it to our boss? We could lose our job. We could lose our house. We could lose custody of your kids. All of those things are things that can happen to people who are put in jail, even for a short time. And studies bear this out. They show that somebody who's in jail for more than 48 hours is more likely to come back to jail. So what that shows is that in many cases, jail is encouraging criminal activity, it's leading to more criminal activity down the line. Nothing could be more perverse than that.
Let me ask you, and those are very revealing studies. But let's talk again about public perceptions, right? Because the public doesn't know that. They haven't seen those numbers. But here's what a vast bulk of the public would think, and it goes back to what we said before. This guy's been charged with something, odds are he did it, or something real close to it, and why should he be back on the street? Aren't I safer if he's in jail? And then you have elected judges and prosecutors, right? And I know from talking to judges that their worst nightmare is you let somebody out on bail, and the next thing you know, they're back in on a homicide charge.
I think we have to change the perception of what our justice system is about. Our justice system should be about accountability and preventing people from committing crimes. You know, I think from a very early stage in our courts, you know, judges were expected to convict people and hand out lengthy sentences. And we need to really change what the goal of our court system and prosecutors should be. It should be about making sure our communities are safe and that we're doing things that actually make our communities safer. We spoke earlier about the fact that when people get out of Rikers, they return right back home. So if our jails and our criminal justice system is not about rehabilitation, we just delay the problem. We're not keeping ourselves safe by putting someone in jail for 6 months or 9 months. They're returning home with much more trauma and much more issues. You know, we know, and it's pretty uncontested, the things that keep people on the straight and narrow are opportunities, employment opportunities, housing opportunities, and you know, having a significant other person in your life. And when we take people and we put them in jail, we remove them from the things that are going to make them with the possibility of having success. And we see this on parole. We take people in and out of the system on these technical violations, and we remove them from their jobs and from their communities, and we yo-yo them back and forth. That's not a recipe to make a person live a productive life. That is a recipe for what we see is to homelessness and to further criminal activity.
Jack, you said something earlier that I think needs to be addressed too. You said people's perception is odds are they committed the crime. But the pretrial process is not supposed to be predictive of whether the person's guilty or not. We have a system of due process that's constitutionally protected to judge whether someone is guilty or not of a crime. They're supposed to go before a jury of their peers, evidence presented, presumption of innocence, all of that good stuff that we believe in. But it is too often being used and perceived as a way to keep guilty people away before they've had that opportunity,
Before
right?
we know truly that they are guilty.
Right, and who gets to judge that then? It's almost like, I'm big on the movie references today, but it's like that movie Minority Report, where they somehow had a predictive way of figuring out who was going to commit a crime, and they would put him in beforehand. Now, that's not what we're supposed to do. So yes, the more people are in jail, the more, I guess, everyone will be. If we're all in jail and no one's on the street, there will be zero crime. So yes, if you take it to a ridiculous point, the more people you keep behind bars, the worse their lives would be, but the more safety you'd have on the streets. But we have a system that's built around fairness and trying to make sure that the guilty are found guilty and punished, and that those people who are not have the opportunity to show that they're not.
Tyler, let me come back to you and some of the recommendations here. A few of the other things that we're seeing is been described as reduced prosecutions, right? Less cases actually being brought. Also, we know that there's been a dramatic reduction in the policy that's been described as stop, ask, and frisk. Went down. I saw numbers saying as many as 700,000 of those instances in 2011, down to about 10,000 now. What's been the impact of those things?
Even just in the past 2.5 years since our commission came out with our report, since there was advocacy around closing Rikers, and since Mayor de Blasio came out and said that the city would close the Rikers jails, there have already been massive changes. Today, there are 2,000 fewer people in jail on any given day than there were 2 years ago. That's a huge change. It's measured in people's lives. And when you look at public safety in this city, we're safer today, or as safe as we've ever been. So it's proof we don't have to jail or incarcerate ourselves to safety. We can do it better and we can do it smarter.
Let me come back to the notion of different jail. Actually, before I get to that, one other thing I want to talk to you about. Give me a quick sense. You have this post-conviction unit that you created in your office. What's the purpose of it?
The Post-Conviction Justice Bureau is to re-examine things that we've done in the past. You know, a lot of the effort to reduce incarceration is on the front end. But if we're going to be serious about doing this work, we have to look at the people who are currently in jail. Every month I visit a upstate prison, and I meet people who the prison believes should be out, that they've been rehabilitated, that they no longer serve a public safety concern, yet they remain in. There are people who are there in their 60s and 70s years of age. This is the most expensive thing that we can do, is to house them and warehouse them upstate. And we have to make sure that we have mechanisms in our law and in your DA's office to make sure that people who can be returned home safely and re-enter society is done. And so our Post-Conviction Bureau will look at that. We'll also look at parole and clemency applications and work with the governor. But also we have other things to make the criminal justice system work for everyone. We have a sealing unit who's going to look at these old cases. People should not walk around for the rest of their lives, especially on low-level offenses, with criminal records that prevent them from moving forward. And so about 2 years ago, Albany passed a sealing statute. Most people don't know it exists. And this, my office now has a portal where people can apply for free to get their records sealed. And instead of the DA fighting them, the DA is going to assist them in getting their records sealed. So that's a big component. You know, we have too many people.
Are we seeing, it's interesting, and I'm going back to my time as a prosecutor, which was a long time ago. But I remember essentially, when people had, motions to expunge records and to seal records and stuff, your position was you objected to it. Basically saying, we want access because we don't know what they might do down the road, so it's better off for people to know to have access to it. Parole applications, you almost uniformly, first time they're up, first eligibility, prosecutor's job was, we object.
Yeah, we were told.
Why are we seeing a change, at least in your office? But why are we seeing a change in terms of prosecutors saying, all right, let's look at some things rationally. Let's see what position we should be taking here, not what position we've always taken.
Because we've seen the tremendous harm our justice system has. We have 2.2 million people in prison across this country. We have tens of thousands of people in state prison and on post-release supervision, basically on parole. And we realize that if we actually are concerned about a system that protects people, that we actually have to scale it down so that the people who are under supervision and the people that are actually in jail are the few people who we believe are really a threat to public safety. We've created a system that actually is too large to actually protect us. We're not going to jail our ways to public safety. And we actually have to get back to the work of saying the hardest thing the government can do is put someone in prison, and that we should reserve that for the people who really need that.
But as I said before, we're talking about perceptions and the perception of the public that they're safe. And all we need is one person who gets out on bail to commit a horrendous crime, or somebody who gets out first eligibility on parole because there's no objection by the prosecutor's office to commit a horrendous crime. And one of those cases is enough for a member of the public to say, you all are not doing your jobs. Your job, your primary job, is not to improve the lives of somebody who's been convicted of a crime. Your primary job is to protect me and my safety and my family and my home. How do we, got a little bit less than a minute here, it's a tough question to ask you to answer quickly, but what do we need to do to get the message out to the public about the value of all these?
Well, we're doing it right now, for starters, but the tough decisions are hard by definition. One of the things beneath the surface as we were debating all these reforms that we just enacted last month was the example from the 80s of Willie Horton. Right. Nobody wants a Willie Horton. One person gets out and does the wrong thing, and it's going to taint everyone and mischaracterize what's happening. It's our job to now educate people about what is just. And now, mind you, there are families, thousands and thousands of them, who are affected by people who are being held in jail unjustly, held pre-trial unjustly. So they will see a very direct benefit. But for everyone else, we've got to explain to them that there's no reason that someone, in the bail example, who is rich is on the streets for being accused of the same thing that someone who is poor is not. These are people who have not been convicted.
Well, gentlemen, I think, as you said, it's important that we have as many of these conversations as possible to get this all out for the public to understand it. Eric, Michael, and Tyler, I appreciate your time, and my hope is we can get together and continue this conversation as we move down the road. But thanks for sharing the time with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
To find out more about our Justice Week coverage and our officials' plans to bring equality to our justice system, make sure you visit us at metrofocus.org.